Captain Peter Cutsey, South Korea. This is my briefing room. We've completed the performance using the OPT. We have received our ATC clearance, and the altitude in the MCP window that we were cleared to was 10,000, and we set that. Now, as the pilot flying, I will give the taxi and takeoff briefing. We'll go through to the taxi briefing first, because it kind of makes sense. That's the order in which we're going to do it. If you have an OPT with JetView or Alito, you can do the briefing from that. We're going to use the chart. We're at the terminal. We'll say for all intents and purposes that this is our position here. So we can anticipate being given a clearance to taxi via Victor to Yankee 1 for full length. Let's just have a look at Yankee 1 in Google Earth. Here's Yankee 1. And if you notice here, there are, of course, signs indicating that you are at the holding point for runway 08 left. So those signs are important. All right, let's go back to, and we've discussed the route that we will actually more than likely end up following that route from this position here on the north civil apron. So, and if there's any questions during that briefing, then that's when the first officer, you would ask your first officer if he understands the briefing. Okay. The next element that would come in series would be the DAPOC 2 Sierra. So that was the clearance that we were given from ATC. And you would, I would, as the pilot flying, I would read off the SID DAPOC 2. First of all, read chart dated the 4th of January, 2019, and it's the 10-3E. And it's Muscat. And your first officer should have the same chart before you read it. Airport elevation is 25 feet. And here is important. Transition altitude is 13,000. RNAV, GNSS, and RNAV 1 required. These are requirements, of course. We're not using VOR radio. We're in an RNAV environment. So you would actually read off the requirements. And then also, they require a minimum climb gradient of 4.5% up to 10,000. So at our speed today, remember our V2 was 134 knots. So if we went to 150 on the high side and looked at the rate, our rate here should be 684 feet per minute. We've got to maintain that as an average all the way through to 10,000 feet. And so we would have no problems maintaining that. So that's part of the briefing. And then the DAPOC 2 Sierra is climb to Mike Sierra 801, and maximum 240 knots. Now, the first officer is actually looking at that, and here it is here. Wow. That's why the pilot monitoring should have the legs page up. So Mike Sierra 801, and there is a restriction, 240 knots or slower or below. So that's a restriction. So and here it is here. Okay. So then the pilot flying would continue the briefing, and then Mike Sierra 803, maximum 240 knots and at or above 10,000. Well, we're clear to maintain 10,000. So we come back and we make sure that we check that out on the legs page. So it's 10,000 or above on the chart. So 10,000 or above and 240 knots or below for the speed. So that's virtually what is the requirement to read on the departure. So the departure's been read and it's been checked, and both pilots are happy with that. Fine. Then we come back to the chart and mention then the DAPOC 2 Sierra goes off to DAPOC. And of course, we saw that here. And it's DAPOC is next on the chart here. We can go to center, map center to see it. It's just inconvenient for me to go to the top now to do it. So that is done. So we'll go back now and do the next part of the briefing. So we'll return the display, correct. And we should have the engine display here for later for the engine start. So that part of the procedure has been done. Now, the next part of your briefing will include non-normals. If it's the first flight of the day, you have the altitude warning light and it's activated, and you wouldn't have to give the briefing with respect to the emergency descent. If you had the light and it wasn't activated or didn't have the light, you'd have to give that briefing, and that's part of your SOPs. Another thing is you probably want to discuss the engine out for that. This is just a sample for the engine out here, and it would be on your OPT, but here the engine failure procedures at 4 DME of Muscat, 114.5, left turn on a track of 060. If you notice, a track of 060. So you adjust your heading to track 060. And then when passing 1900 feet and on QNH, which you would be, because transition altitude is not until 13,000, left turn to the MCT VOR 114.5 and hold inbound 265 right-hand turn. All right, so let's just go back to our map, and something you could do, and unless you have an engine out procedure already in your database, is go down to the fixed page and put MCT on the fixed page. And /4 miles. And /4 miles. So we can do that. And it will paint an actual, let's just go back to the takeoff page here, because that's where I could be on it as pilot flying. So here we are here. And we know that at 4 DME, we're going to have to turn left. So the map should reflect that. And that's at 4 DME, we should be actually in the left turn to a track of, as we mentioned, 060. So if you go back to the legs page, you'll notice the 069 to MS801. That's your normal routing. We're talking about an engine out routing. So you're going to track 060 after reaching the 4 DME fix. Now, if you have a route to, we don't in this software here on this computer, but you could actually put the engine out in route 2 and leave it there and have it activated and executed if in fact you needed it after takeoff, depending on your company SOPs. Many companies actually have the engine out procedures already established in the main database, and all you have to do is when you do have an engine failure, it'll come up automatically. So in any case, follow your company SOPs. You should always be thinking about what would happen in the event if. All right, let's go back to the top here. So we have covered engine out. We could cover a rejected takeoff. So I would say in the event of a rejected takeoff, I'll call reject, and the thrust lever is closed, auto throttle disengage, and ensure max braking, auto braking, if not max manual braking, speed brake lever up, and I'll select reverse through the D-dent to required reverse for full stop. On a full stop, I will stop, set the parking brake, speed brake lever down. Meanwhile, you will, and the first officer would actually follow through what his company SOP said he would do, which is basically to make sure that I've done all of that, and at 60 knots call tower, or advising of the reject, and just before we stop, attention, crew at stations, attention, crew at stations, whatever your company SOPs say. In most cases, that's going to be what your SOPs will say. The first officer will do that. And then once you stop, we will assess the situation. We'll do any recall items as required. remembering that the captain is always the pilot flying on the ground. The captain owns the thrust levers on the ground, the captain owns the engine start levers on the ground, and the first officer owns the fire switches, meaning that if you had reason to have to go through an engine fire sphere damage separation recall items, the captain will handle the thrust lever close, the captain will handle the engine start lever to cut off, the first officer will handle the fire switch and follow your company procedures. So it's good to talk about a reject, and you would only reject for basically 4 things: an engine failure, any fire, unsafe to fly, or predicted wind shear. Other than that, you would carry on. So basically, that's what your SOPs will actually say. So, and we've covered all of this, by the way, in the briefings that I've done already on a rejected takeoff. So it's important that you have a look at that. It'll help you disseminate what I'm talking about. And you also want to really think that if you're going to reject a takeoff, don't be in a hurry to get off the runway. Yes, Muscat is a single runway operation, but remember that you own that runway, and that runway is going to have to be inspected later. And in my experience, in my rejected takeoff experience over 60 years of flying, close to 6 only, it was a good thing I didn't move the airplane because I had problems with brake seizures and blown tires, etc. So, captain's decision, but do not rush to get off a runway. You own that runway. The airport's going to be closed until they inspect every inch of that runway. So it's better not to rush off the runway. If you had a packed trip off, something simple like that, that's a different story. All right. So let's say we've covered the departure, which we did. We've covered the non-normals, and maybe an engine failure after V1. We discussed that also. So any questions? No questions. Then we actually are ready now and waiting for the ground personnel to complete their ground checks. That's what we're going to do in the next video, which will be the before start procedure. Now, the before start procedure actually encompasses giving a taxi briefing and a takeoff briefing. But if you have time, in our case, we had time, we did it then. So you have to use your head on all this because you only have basically 30 minutes normally to get everything done. All right. Thanks for watching. Contact information is on the screen. See you in the next video, which will be the before start procedure.